Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Adult Bible Class. Good to see you joining us today. Sorry for the slight delay. Today, we're studying Joseph's life of dreams and schemes. We've been working through the book of Genesis. The main thrust of the book of Genesis is the beginning of the family of Abraham and his son Isaac and his son Jacob. And now today we're to the fourth generation, Joseph. But we didn't quite finish up with Jacob. Last week, Jay gave us Genesis 28 with Jacob's ladder. That was the part of the lesson that we studied last week. Jacob had the dream and he saw the ladder. He said, "This is the house of God." He named the place Bethel, house of God. But we've got to finish up with Jacob, and then we've got to talk about Joseph today. And I'm sorry, but this is the last lesson in Genesis. And there's 50 chapters in Genesis. So what are we going to do with chapters 29 through 50? This lesson comes from 39. But I can't do that. I can't leave all those important chapters out. So we're going to cover all of them in the next 35 minutes. It's going to be great. So today, Joseph is the original dream specialist. He's the first person in the Bible that becomes a dream specialist. As we go through the Old Testament, we'll discover that there's another dream specialist hundreds of years later, and his name will be Daniel. But today, the focus is going to be on Joseph and the dreams and the schemes of his life. Oh, yeah, there we go. Everything's working. Thank you for your patience. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'll figure that out and hopefully prevent it. But we've got 29 through 50. How many chapters is that? We've got to use biblical math to find the answer because biblical math is not the same as ordinary math. So here's the way we do. We start with chapter 50. We subtract chapter 29, but because it's biblical math, we have to add chapter 29 back in. You can go home and work this out for yourself and figure it out, but this is it. So you take chapter 50 minus chapter 29, and then you add in chapter 29 again, and then you get the right number. It only works if you do it this way. You can count it on a piece of paper if you don't believe me. So 22 chapters is what we're going to cover today, and here's how we're going to cover it. Since last week, Jacob's ladder. In chapter 29, the very next chapter after Jay's lesson, Jacob meets Rachel, and he falls in love, and he wants to marry her, but her dad, Laban, says, well, you got to work for her. She's not free. He says, you work 7 years, I'll give her to you. He works 7 years, and it turns out that Laban is treacherous. He changed the deal. And he said, well, you get Leah first, and then you work 7 more years, and then you get Rachel. And Jacob said, it's still a deal. He said, I'll take her. And come to find out, he did get Rachel a week later, but he owed Laban 7 more years of labor, which he served out. And so I'm going to give you a little summary of each chapter as we go through, and then Jackie's going to read a key verse out of that chapter. So this is how we're going to do it. You ready, Jackie? So verse 20 says,
So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her.
Oh, isn't that sweet, ladies? Gives you a good warm feeling.
That's before he married her.
Yes. Before he couldn't get rid of her. But we all know this feeling, maybe not about another person, but you all have done something that you enjoyed so much, it gave you so much pleasure that it seemed like the time just flew by. Maybe these lessons are like that for you. But anyway, he worked 14 years. He finally got the love of her life, and it turns out that she's like his mom. She can't have babies. So that's going to be a problem for him. In chapter 30, Jacob experiences a population and a blessing explosion as his 2 wives, Rachel and Leah, compete to bear children for him. Can you imagine, men, women competing to have your children? What kind of a life would that be? And it turned out that it just wasn't those 2, but it was those two sisters and their two maids. So we've got 4 women competing to be Jacob's baby mamas. So here's what happened in verse 22.
Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive.
Finally, but she's way behind because there's already 7 sons born, and there were 4 sons born up here. So Rachel is the last one to begin bearing children, and the last one that the last child is Joseph. Now, there's going to be one more after Joseph, but he's going to be about 12 to 15 years later, and that will be Benjamin. And Benjamin right here will be the last of the line. But we're going to go over these 12 sons quickly because they turn out to be the famous 12 tribes of Israel. All right, so let's look and see how that worked out. So this is Jacob's baby boom, or could have called it Jacob's baby mamas. But Jacob is going to be renamed to Israel, and so this is where the 12 tribes come from. So Jacob works 7 years for Rachel. He gets Leah, the older sister, and Leah pops out Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Now, these are all going to be significant. Reuben, being the firstborn, should have gotten the blessing, right? He should have gotten the birthright. We talked about the birthright a few weeks ago. Reuben was number 1. He was the oldest. He should have been the most responsible. But he had a big boo-boo later on in his life. We're going to talk about that. And then Simeon and Levi pulled a prank, so to speak. They committed mass murder on someone that had taken advantage of their sister. And so they are going to be disqualified by Jacob for the birthright. And that leaves number 4, Judah. And wouldn't you know, Judah turns out to be a good one. Not that the others weren't good, but Judah just didn't disqualify himself like Reuben, Simeon, and Levi did. And so Judah becomes the bloodline of Jesus. And Judah becomes the tribe where all the kings of Israel will come, all the kings of Judah will come, and then the nation later will be named the kingdom of Judah when they split into 2 nations. That's down the road. All right, so Leah pops out 4, and Rachel says, I can't take that no more, and so she gives Bilhah. She's on Team Rachel. She gives Bilhah to Jacob, and Jacob is happy to have children with her, and she has Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah says, well, 2 can play that game, and she gives Zilpah, her maid, she's on Team Leah, to Jacob, and they have Gad and Asher together. And then Leah's not done yet, and she's going to have Issachar and Zebulun and the sister Dinah. We don't know if there's other sisters, but there's a specific story about her, so she's definitely listed as one. And then finally, Rachel has Joseph, and about 12 to 15 years later, Benjamin. And there's your 12 tribes of Israel or Jacob. And this is going to be the bloodline of Christ. Interesting now that we've skipped over the firstborn for multiple generations. We skipped Ishmael, we skipped Esau, and now we're skipping Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. So that little thing about the firstborn, it's not working out exactly right here, but it'll straighten out in a little while. It straightens out, I think, after Judah, and the firstborn begins to be the one that's going to carry the bloodline of the Messiah. So there's your 12 tribes and Jacob's baby boom with his baby mamas. All right, back to Genesis 31. So after years of working for Laban, Jacob decides he wants to leave. Laban is blessed because of Jacob. Jacob is under the blessings of God, and we're going to find that wherever the blessing people are, there's blessings that spill over into the other people in their lives. And that's the way it is with us too. We should be blessing the other people that are in our lives. And so Jacob, just by his presence there working for Laban, he has blessed Laban, and God has prospered Laban because God is prospering Jacob. And so Laban doesn't want Jacob to leave, and Jacob has to secretly leave, and he takes all his baby mamas and all his babies, and they get out of there, and then Laban says, no, no, you're not, and chases him down. But when he finally catches Jacob and all his children and wives, they reconcile, and they make a covenant, and they said, okay, we're not going to fight anymore. They work out a deal, and then Jacob takes his family, and he's going back to the land of Abraham. Ready?
Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you.
All right. So he had to go over and find Rachel and get a wife. And he picked up Leah there and Bilhah and Zilpah and all the kids. And now they're going back to the promised land, the land of Abraham. In chapter 32, Jacob fears as he approaches the promised land because he knows his brother Esau's there. And it's been a long time, 15 to 20 years or so. But he knows that he ripped Esau off when he tricked him and took the birthright. Although it was legitimate, there was still some tension there because I'm sure Esau realized I should have never made that deal with the bowl of stew. Remember that lesson? And so Jacob is afraid. He doesn't know how Esau is going to receive him when he gets back there to the place where Abraham and Esau are. So he wrestles all night with a man. The Bible says it's a man, but Jacob calls that man God. And it was during that wrestling match that he earned the name Israel. But later on, we're going to see that God speaks to him and tells him again, your name is not Jacob, it's Israel. But this happens a little bit later. So there's twice where he's renamed. It seems like he was renamed here, but maybe it didn't stick or it didn't take or people didn't call him that. But again, later, God is going to say, your name is Israel. All right, so verse 28 in chapter 32 says this.
Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.
All right, and then chapter 33, Jacob and Esau meet together. They reconcile. Jacob is so relieved that his brother is not going to kill him. And his brother's not angry with him. And when they meet, Jacob sends all of his stuff ahead of him, even his wives. He splits them into two groups, and he says, well, if Esau kills all this group, at least I'll have this other half. He probably put Rachel in the back group because that was his favorite. Probably put Leah in the front group because that wasn't his favorite. But however he did it, he split everything up into two groups. He sent one group ahead to Esau, then the next group. And then finally, by the time he got there, Esau was willing to receive him peaceably. And verse 4 of chapter 33 says,
but Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept.
Wow. Esau was not angry. Jacob was so relieved. He was so relieved, and they hugged, they embraced. And they wept together there in chapter 33. In chapter 34 is the story of the sister Dinah. This is Jacob's daughter. And they're living in Shechem. And there's a man named Shechem in the city of Shechem. And he falls in love with Dinah, and he takes advantage of her. And he sexually assaults her. And Levi and Simeon find out about it, and they said, oh, no, you don't. I can't really do the neck thing there. I haven't practiced it, but you know what I was trying to do. And it's a great story, kind of, because the people of Shechem say, hey, we want to marry your girls. And Simeon and Levi say, well, okay, but we won't let anybody marry our girls unless they're circumcised. And the men of Shechem say, okay, we'll do it. We want them so bad, we'll do it. And so they were circumcised, these men of Shechem. And on the third day, Simeon and Levi said, okay, they should be about ripe right about now. And they went down there while all of those men in Shechem were disabled because they had been circumcised 3 days earlier, and they were healing. And Simeon and Levi killed all the men in Shechem for what one of them apparently did to Dinah, their sister. So that's the story in Genesis 34. There you go.
But they replied, should he have treated our sister like a prostitute?
All right, so Simeon and Levi went down and took vengeance on the people of Shechem for what they did to Dinah. But later on, Jacob is going to disqualify Simeon and Levi from the birthright for this particular act. He said, you're too violent, and you're not going to get the birthright. So that's how number 2 and number 3 were disqualified from the birthright. In chapter 35, Jacob returns to Bethel, the house of God, and God confirms his covenant with him. He is renamed to Israel again, and his final son, Benjamin, is born to Rachel.
God said to him, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel. So he named him Israel.
All right, so apparently it stuck this time in chapter 35. In chapter 36, the descendants of Esau are listed, marking the genealogy of the Edomites. The descendants of Esau are called the Edomites, and that's in chapter 36.
So Esau, that is Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir.
All right, so that's Esau in 36. In chapter 37, Joseph begins to dream, and his dreams get him in trouble. They make his brothers jealous, and it leads to Joseph being sold into slavery. Joseph had 2 dreams that we know of. In the first, Joseph dreamt that he and his brothers were binding sheaves in the field, and his sheaf rose up and stood upright while his brothers' sheaves all fell down and bowed to Jacob's sheaves of grain. And this dream suggested that they would at some point in their lives bow down to Joseph. And they didn't like that. And Joseph had a second dream. He dreamed of the sun and the moon and the 11 stars. Well, it's obvious to them who the 11 stars are. It's his 11 brothers, because there's 12 of them. And he says, I dreamed that the 11 stars bowed down to me, and also the sun and the moon. And I'm sure they thought the sun and the moon must be mom and dad. Or moms and dad, because they had 4 moms, right? Moms and dad. But Joseph only had 1 mom, by the way. Everybody has 1 mom. Okay. Just a thing there. Okay, and so verse 9 says,
Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me.
All right, so all these dreams Joseph is having about his family bowing down to him don't set well with his family. And so it's going to lead to this event right here. This is Genesis 37. Out of jealousy and anger, Joseph's brothers scheme. Here comes the scheme. They scheme to kill him, but Reuben saves Joseph's life. That's the oldest, remember? Reuben says, let's don't kill him. Let's just put him in a pit. And he was thinking, I'll come back later and save him and take him back home to daddy. Because Reuben knew that Joseph was the favorite child. So, but this is how it happened. Joseph is coming to meet his brothers. When they saw him from a distance, before he came closer to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Now then, come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, a vicious animal has devoured him. Then we will see what will become of his dreams. So this tells you right there, they were very upset about these dreams that he was having. But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands by saying, let's not take his life. Then Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into the pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, so that later he might rescue him out of their hands and return him to their father. So it came about when Joseph reached his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the multicolored tunic that was on him, that was made by his father, that also made them jealous. And they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty with no water in it. Now this is just cruel. This is the baby brother. And these older brothers are really acting childishly, aren't they? They're really acting childishly. He's not really a threat to them. And if he is going to turn out to be greater than them, there's really nothing they can do to stop it, right? If this is something that God has ordained, they're not going to be able to prevent him from being great. And it turns out that's exactly what happens. They don't prevent him from being great. But God is working in all of these situations in Joseph's life. So, in chapter 38, we have the story of Judah and Tamar. And because we're running out of time, I'm going to skip it, but it's an interesting story. I'll just give you the quick version. Tamar was married to, this is Joseph, picture's a little bit early here. Tamar was married to Judah, Judah's son. Tamar was married to Judah's son. Judah's son died. Judah gave his second son to Tamar, and he died. Now, according to the rules or the customs, Judah was to give his third son to Tamar so that they could have children, so that the bloodline could continue, the bloodline of Judah. And this is the bloodline of Christ. Don't forget, Judah is the one that gets the birthright. So the birthright is coming through Judah. Jesus is coming through Judah. And so Tamar's first husband dies. Tamar's second husband dies. And Judah said, I'm not giving you my third son because you've killed two already, or something happened to them. And she still didn't have any children by the first two. And Judah said, I'm not going to give you number three. You go back to your daddy and you just live with your daddy as a widow. And Tamar didn't like that. And so she heard that Judah was coming to town one day, and she dressed up like a prostitute. And Judah, the father of our Lord, bought her, so to speak. And he didn't have any money on him apparently at the time. And she said, what are you going to give me in exchange for this transaction that we're going to transact between me and you? And he said, well, I'll give you a kid. And she, not a kid, but a goat. But he actually did give her a kid, like a baby kid, accidentally. And she said, well, give me something that I'll know that you're going to pay me with a goat. And so he gave Tamar. By the way, he didn't know this was his daughter-in-law. She dressed up like a prostitute, and he didn't know it was Tamar. And so he gave her some personal items that would be easily identified as being only belonging to Judah. And wouldn't you know, Tamar comes up pregnant. Oh, and the scandals abound, and she's playing the prostitute, they said. And she says, well, I'll tell you who did this to me. It's the man that owns these things. And she held out Judah's possessions. And it was known that it was Judah that had done this to her, and he didn't even realize it was his daughter-in-law. What a scandalous story in the bloodline of Jesus. But anyway, here's what the Bible says.
Judah recognized them.
That's the trinkets that she had from him.
Said, she, Tamar, is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. All
right, so apparently it only happened once. He didn't know it was her. Crazy story, huh? All this is in the Bible. So, and he did say that she's more righteous, and he did admit, she did this because I would not give her my third son, Shelah. So, I guess he said, I guess she's justified. I'm not sure. You can read it and decide for yourself. Chapter 39, meanwhile, Joseph is in Egypt. His brothers have sold him to a caravan of slave traders. He's in Egypt, and he's prospering. He's doing great. He's managing all that Potiphar owns. Potiphar's a great, powerful man. The Lord was with... Oh, go ahead.
The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian.
Look at him. He's doing great. Look at the giant house he's in. Look at all the people working under him. He's living his best life right there. All right. So this is actually the chapter where the lesson is. Can we read this real quick?
Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. This
is the name of the lesson in the book. The Lord was with Joseph. And we're going to see this phrase a couple more times. It's in there to emphasize the fact that all this that seems like it's random and it's bizarre and it's just not working, and sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, it's there to emphasize the fact that God was in all of this that was happening to Joseph. Even though Joseph was not the bloodline was going with Judah. Jesus was going to come from Judah. Jesus did not come from Joseph. But Joseph turns out to be the savior of all the brothers, which are the 12 tribes of Israel. So he turns out to be the one that actually gets them through this hard period of time where there's a famine. And then amazingly, the Lord brings the entire family down to Egypt. And it's like they're in a little incubator. And while they're there in the safety and protection and the wealth and the riches of Egypt, the family explodes. And then we're going to see what's going to happen with him later in the book of Exodus. But let's get finished with Genesis first. Keep going, please.
And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord had made all that he did prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he owned.
Okay.
It came about that from that time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. So the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field.
He's saying it over and over again for emphasis.
He left Joseph in charge of everything that he owned, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food with which he ate.
Potiphar didn't worry about anything because Joseph handled it all. Joseph managed everything. Joseph was doing great. God was blessing Joseph. It was obvious to Potiphar that Joseph was a special person.
Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and it came about after these events that his master's wife had her eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Sleep with me."
It's always a woman, isn't it? We got a great man here. Great man. The Lord is with him. The Lord is blessing him. The Lord is blessing everything he touches and everybody in his life. It's just wonderful, and he's handsome. He's got a good-looking form and a good-looking face. And she had her eyes on Joseph. And she just came right out and said it. Okay?
But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put me in charge of all that he owns. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?"
Wow, what a great explanation. He could have said no, but he explained it to her. Thanks, Joseph. But look at the integrity of this man. Look at the integrity, and nobody's there watching him except you know who, the Lord. Isn't that the most important person that's watching all of us? I learned at a young age that God is watching everything I do, and God knows everything I think. And that has stuck with me all my life. And people need to know that. We all need to be constantly aware that God is in our brains. He hears what we're thinking. He knows what we're doing. He knows more than Santa Claus. Santa Claus knows when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake, but God knows what you're thinking. All right. Though
she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her.
Oh, man. Day after day. Day after day. Can you imagine this? And he's got all this power and all this responsibility. And his boss's wife is coming on to him strong day after day.
He did not listen to her to lie beside her or be with her.
He just didn't listen to her. All right, let's see what happened.
Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the people of the household was there inside. So she grabbed him by his garment, saying, "Sleep with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside.
He did the right thing. He got out of there. He didn't try and talk with her. He didn't try and reason. He didn't try and work out a plan. How about later tonight? Nope, he didn't. He didn't do that. He got out of there. He got away from her. He left the temptation scene.
When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to
Now
us."
this he is talking about Potiphar, her husband. She's blaming this thing that happened with Joseph. She's blaming it on her husband Potiphar.
A Hebrew to us to make fun of us. He came in to me to sleep with me, and I screamed when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed. He left his garment beside me and fled and went outside.
False accusation, right? False accusation. All right, keep going, please.
So she left his garment beside her until his master came home.
That's
Then she
her
spoke-
husband, Potiphar.
Then she spoke to him with these words. The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make fun of me, but when I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled outside.
Okay.
Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned, so Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison.
Wow, he did nothing wrong. He did all the right things. It seems like he could not have been more squeaky clean than he was.
They always believe the woman's account.
But you have to believe the woman's account, apparently. And, what else could Potiphar do? At least he didn't kill Joseph, right? At least he didn't kill the slave. But he put him in prison. He put him in the special prison, though. He didn't go in the regular prison. He went in the special prison for political prisoners, apparently. And let's see what happens.
But the Lord was with Joseph.
There you go. The Lord was still with Joseph in prison.
And
Okay.
extended kindness to him and gave,
He got extended kindness from the Lord.
and gave him favor in the sight of the warden of the prison.
He's doing so good in prison. You can't keep a good man down. If somebody's blessed of God, you can't unbless them. And Joseph is blessed. He's highly favored. And even in prison, he's prospering. He's doing great.
And the warden of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for.
It was evident even to the head jailer that this is a special man. He's got a special blessing of God. He's a man to be trusted. They put Joseph over the entire prison.
The warden of the prison did not supervise anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made whatever he did prosper.
So the jailer gave Joseph the keys. He gave him all the security codes. And he said, "Here's my cell. Call me if you need me." And he took off. He didn't even need to be there. Joseph was running the prison, and he was doing a great job of it. In chapter 40, Joseph interprets dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, who are also in prison with Joseph. And the dreams mean one of those men, the baker, I believe, is to die, and the cupbearer is to be restored. And so he told them those dreams. He told them the meaning of their dreams. And it actually happened. One day, soon, a man came and opened the prison, took the cupbearer out, took the baker out, restored the cupbearer to his job with Pharaoh, and killed the baker. And when Joseph interpreted their dreams, he said, "Be sure to the cupbearer, he said, be sure when you get your job back, you tell Pharaoh that I'm down here and I didn't do anything wrong." Of course, everybody in prison didn't do anything wrong, right? All right. But he forgets about Joseph. The cupbearer gets his job back, but he forgets about Joseph. Joseph remains in prison.
"We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams."
So they told him, and he interpreted the dreams. In chapter 41, Joseph is called out of prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Finally, this is Pharaoh, not Potiphar, the man he was working for, but Pharaoh, the big cheese, the king, the head of Egypt. He had a dream, and Joseph interprets this dream because Joseph has this gift from God to interpret dreams. And God uses it to get him out of prison, and he rises to power in Egypt, and he becomes a ruler. When I was a kid, I used to have this joke, who was the straightest man in the Bible? Joseph, because the Lord made a ruler out of him. I don't use that joke anymore. He also has two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. In go ahead and read this, please.
"You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land."
Can you believe it? His brothers put him in a pit, and we're going to kill him, but Reuben talked him out of it, and they sold him to some slave traders, and he's what? In charge of the whole land of Egypt. God is with him. The Lord is with him in a special way. In chapter 42, the brothers come to Egypt to buy grain because there is a famine, and they unknowingly fulfill his dream by bowing down to Joseph. They don't even recognize him anymore. He's grown up, and he's in all this prosperity of Egypt, and he's a ruler, and they come and they bow down to him, and they want grain, and Joseph recognizes them, and they don't know it's him. And so he holds brother number 3, Simeon, as hostage, and he says, "Go back." He said, how's your father? How's your family? Where are you from? And he got some information, and he found out there was a baby born after him, and his name was Benjamin, and it was born to his mother, Rachel. So out of all the 12 brothers, this was Joseph's only full-blooded brother, Benjamin. He had never seen Benjamin. He said, "You go back and get your other brother and come back and I'll give you the grain." So, well, what are they going to do?
Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." Okay, this is the only thing we can fault Joseph over. He schemes with his brothers right here. And
can't really rule a country without scheming.
Yeah. So he's working out a plan though. But even in his scheme to kind of play with his brothers a little bit, God is in this also, because through this scheme he's going to get the whole family down there. Now I know we're almost overdue. We got a few more. Can we speed through this or what? Okay. Then the brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, the baby brother, Joseph's only full brother, to buy more grain, and Joseph schemes to test them.
Deeply moved on seeing his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there.
He was so moved by seeing his brothers and his baby brother Benjamin, who had never met. He had to go have a cry, and so he went off and he had a good cry by himself, but he still didn't tell them who he was. Joseph tests his brothers further by a scheme to hide the cup. And so they're going to buy grain, and they're going to go back, and he tells his servant, "You put my special cup in my baby brother's sack." He probably didn't say it's my baby brother. He said the youngest one's sack. And it's going to be another scheme.
Then the steward proceeded to search, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack.
So he sent them on home, and then after a few days he sent his servants, and he said, "Go catch those men and look through their cups and look through their bags, and whoever has my cup, bring them back to me as a hostage." And wouldn't you know, the baby brother, Benjamin, had the cup in his sack, and he didn't put it in there. Joseph had it planted in there. And the brothers think they're going to get killed, and they're going to take his brother, they're going to take Benjamin away, and they're all upset, and they're trembling, and they're scared. And they come back, and Joseph tells them who he is. He reveals himself to his brothers, and he forgives them. Look what he says.
"And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you."
Joseph said the whole thing was God's plan. I can see it clearly now. God sent me ahead of you to save the family. So Joseph had the right outlook on that. We're going to skip through this reading because we had a little late start today, but he does reveal himself to his brothers. He said, "I am Joseph." He asked about his father Jacob. They said, "Yes, Jacob is still alive." He said, "Go get my father and bring him down here." So they came down. They brought the whole family. The whole family moves to Egypt.
"I am God, the God of your father," he said. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great
This is God
nation.
talking to Jacob, the
I
father.
will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes."
All right. And then Jacob comes down. Joseph provides for them. He sets them up in the land of Goshen, which is the best place to be in Egypt. And we're going to skip that, and then we're going to go 48. In chapter 48, Jacob blesses Joseph's sons, and Manasseh is the oldest, but what did he say? I couldn't understand you. We keep going. And so they come up to be blessed, and Jacob swaps his hands, and he puts his right hand on the youngest. Remember already we've had several reversals of the birth order. or the birthright, and Jacob is about to do it again. And instead of blessing the oldest Manasseh, he blesses Ephraim first, and he gives the birthright to Ephraim, Joseph's younger son. All right, and then we're going to skip that. And then in chapter 49, Jacob gives a little blessing over all of his 12 sons. And this particular one in verse 10 says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, because Judah is going to be the bloodline of Christ, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. This is a little cryptic, but he's talking about Jesus the Messiah. When he comes, the nations will obey him. In chapter 50, last chapter of Genesis, Jacob dies. Joseph buries him. He reassures his brothers again, because, they still are a little scared of him because of what they've done. And he said in the last chapter of Genesis, you intended harm to me, but God intended it for good, to save many lives. So Jacob dies. Joseph buries him. And then also in chapter 50, Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you out of this land back to the land of promise, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the book ends with, so Joseph died at the age of 110, and they embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. And that's where we're going to leave the children of Israel. We're going to leave them in Egypt. We're going to let them cook there. They're going to simmer for about 400 years. So between this week and our next lesson, and by the way, next week is going to be, is this correct still? Are we still doing this?
Yes.
Okay, next week we're not having class, we're having breakfast. So come for a great breakfast, and then we'll be starting the new book after that. Leo's lesson got preempted by the breakfast. He will be doing it on a Wednesday night. Be looking for that. He's going to give us the book of Job, hopefully. Great. Thank you for coming today. God bless you. Thank you for giving me 6 extra minutes.